The hospital smelled like fear and antiseptic. The sharp scent of chemicals mixed with the quiet hum of machines, and a sense of helplessness hung in the air. Leonard Carter, the billionaire tycoon who had built empires with his mind and money, lay motionless in a hospital bed. His skin was pale, almost gray, and every breath he took sounded weak and shallow. Around him, 15 of the finest doctors in the country argued softly, each voice full of concern and frustration. Despite their training, their experience, and every tool at their disposal, nothing had worked. Every treatment had failed. Every medicine, every procedure, every advanced machine had proven useless. Outside the glass window, the hospital corridor was quiet. Footsteps echoed softly on the shiny tiles, the sound of people going about their busy day. Among them, a small figure moved with purpose, almost unnoticed. Marcus, 12 years old, pushed a mop cart, his dark eyes scanning every corner of the hallway. He was the janitor's son, quiet and invisible in the world of doctors, nurses, and patients. Yet Marcus had a mind that saw details others missed. He had read every book he could find in the hospital library, watched surgeries through windows, and learned about the human body from observation. While others saw him as a child, he saw the world differently, carefully, curiously, and with sharp focus. Today, however, his eyes were fixed on Leonard's room. He could see the life of a man who had everything, now hanging by a fragile thread. Marcus had never met the billionaire, and yet he felt a strange connection, a need to watch, to understand, and maybe somehow to help. He noticed the machines, the doctor's worried expressions, the way the IV dripped slightly slower than it should. These were small things, almost invisible to anyone else, but to Marcus, they were pieces of a puzzle waiting to be solved. Inside the room, tension was thick. Dr. Simmons, one of the senior doctors, shook his head. "We've done everything," he said, voice low but tense. "If he doesn't respond soon, there's nothing more we can do." His words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Nurses whispered among themselves, and the monitors beeped in a rhythm that seemed too slow, too fragile. Leonard's family, wealthy and powerful, waited outside, unaware of what Marcus was watching so closely. They had paid for the best, and yet the best was failing. Marcus moved closer to the glass. He saw a tiny irregularity in the way Leonard's heart monitor ticked, a faint delay in the pulse that no adult had noticed. His heart raced. He didn't fully understand why, but he felt in his gut that this small detail mattered. It was almost invisible, but to him, it screamed that something could be done. Marcus whispered to himself, "They're missing something. They don't see it, but I do." He had spent years learning to notice what others ignored. While the doctors relied on expensive machines and textbooks, Marcus relied on observation, intuition, and patience. He had learned that life was often in the details, the tiny things that could make a difference between failure and success. And now, as Leonard Carter fought for his life, Marcus felt a strange mix of fear and determination. He was just a boy, unnoticed and unimportant to the world of billionaires and doctors, yet he had a chance, maybe the only chance, to do something no one else could. As he stood there, staring through the glass, he felt a quiet resolve grow inside him. He would not let this man die if he could help it. Not because Leonard was rich, not because of fame or money, but because Marcus understood the fragility of life in a way no one else did. Sometimes it was the smallest, most unnoticed eyes that could see the truth, and Marcus was ready to see what nobody else could. The room inside the hospital remained tense, the machine still beeping, the doctor still uncertain. But outside the room, standing with mop in hand, a boy was watching. A boy who knew that sometimes life's most important moments were waiting for someone brave enough and smart enough to notice. And for Marcus, this was that moment. Inside the hospital room, the atmosphere was tense, almost unbearable. Leonard Carter's chest rose and fell slowly, each breath a struggle. 15 of the best doctors stood around him, their faces pale with worry. Charts and machines surrounded them, lines and numbers showing the life they were trying to save. Yet despite all the technology, all the knowledge, all the experience in the world, Leonard's condition refused to improve. Every test, every medicine, every procedure had failed. For a man who had conquered the world with his mind and money, this was a fight he could not win. Dr. Simmons, the lead physician, ran his hand over his face in frustration. "We've tried everything," he muttered. "All advanced treatments, every option. Nothing is working. His body is rejecting everything." Other doctors nodded grimly. Each one was an expert with decades of practice, but none could see a solution. They were like painters staring at a blank canvas, unsure where to place the first stroke. Meanwhile, Marcus stood outside the room, clutching his mop handle tightly. He felt the tension inside like it was his own heartbeat. He had watched doctors work countless times, had read every medical book in the hospital library, had observed surgeries through windows and quietly taken notes in his mind. He knew that even the smallest detail could make the difference between life and death. And now, staring at Leonard Carter, he felt that life depended on noticing something everyone else had missed. His eyes went to the machines. Beeps, blips, and lines danced across the monitors, but one small pattern caught his attention. It was subtle, almost invisible, a tiny delay in the IV drip that matched a pause in Leonard's heart rhythm. Marcus's mind raced. He had read about rare reactions like this before, conditions that even highly trained doctors could overlook if they were focused only on the obvious. It was a detail so small that 15 doctors could not see it, but Marcus did. He took a careful step closer, his eyes never leaving the monitor. He whispered to himself, "It's here. It's so small, but it matters. Just a tiny change, and maybe he can survive." His heart pounded with both fear and hope. He was only 12 years old, a janitor's son with no authority, yet he felt the responsibility of someone much older, someone much wiser. Inside the room, the doctors continued to argue over the next step. "We can try increasing the dosage," one suggested. "No, that will damage the kidneys," another countered. The conversation was a blur to Marcus. He didn't need opinions. He needed observation. He needed to see the real problem, not just the symptoms. A nurse passed by the door and Marcus grabbed her arm gently. "Please," he said, his voice trembling but firm. "You have to listen to me. There's something wrong with the IV. It's tiny, almost nothing, but it's causing him to fail. Just adjust it slightly, please." The nurse hesitated, glancing at the room full of doctors. 15 brilliant minds all ignoring the boy, but something in Marcus's eyes, a mixture of fear and unwavering determination, made her pause. She took a deep breath and nodded, silently trusting him. Marcus's hands shook, but he pointed carefully to the tiny line on the IV bag. "Here, just like this," he said. Back in the room, Leonard's breathing grew more shallow. Time was slipping away, seconds like droplets falling through a sieve. The doctors were still blind to what Marcus had seen. Their experience, their degrees, their machines, they were all failing because they overlooked what mattered most. Observation, patience, and care. Marcus's voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it carried more weight than all the orders from the doctors combined. He watched, waited, and hoped. This was the moment he had dreamed of, the moment where he could make a difference. For a man who had conquered the world, it was now a boy who could save it, and Marcus knew deep inside that if he didn't act now, there would be no second chance. The room inside the hospital felt like a storm trapped in glass. Leonard Carter's breathing grew shallow, almost fragile, and the monitors screamed warnings no one wanted to hear. 15 of the most experienced doctors in the country moved quickly, shouting instructions, flipping through charts, checking every possible treatment. But no matter what they did, Leonard's body refused to respond. Each passing second felt heavier, as if time itself was pressing down on everyone in the room. Marcus stood just outside, frozen for a moment by the fear that curled in his chest like ice. He had watched so many emergencies before, but this was different. This was a life slipping away, one that no money, no experience, no authority could save except maybe him. His small hands gripped the mop tightly, knuckles white as he observed the monitors. He noticed a faint irregularity, a subtle pause in the heart rhythm that the machines and doctors were missing. A bead of sweat ran down his forehead. Marcus whispered to himself, "It's right there. It's small, but it's important. They don't see it, but I do." He had spent years learning to notice the unnoticed, training his mind in patience and careful observation. While adults relied on protocols and rules, Marcus relied on curiosity and instinct. Now all that knowledge, all those quiet hours of study, had led to this single moment. Inside, the tension was unbearable. Nurses rushed back and forth, doctors barked orders, and Leonard's family stood in silence outside, helpless and afraid. The room smelled of antiseptic, fear, and desperation. The machines beeped frantically, each tone sharper and faster than the last. Leonard's eyes fluttered open for a moment, a weak attempt to breathe life into his failing body. He looked around, powerless and fragile, and Marcus felt a pang of sorrow he had never felt before. This was not about wealth or status, it was about life itself. Marcus stepped closer to the door. "I know what it is," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I know how to fix it." His voice trembled, but there was determination behind it. He could see the tiny problem no one else could. The invisible error in the IV that was making Leonard's body reject every treatment. He knew if someone would only listen, the man could survive. He grabbed the arm of a passing nurse. "Please," he begged, "you have to adjust the IV. Just a tiny change. It's working against him. He can't take it like this. He'll die if nothing is done." The nurse looked at him, startled, glancing toward the room full of doctors. 15 brilliant minds, all the best in their field, yet none of them had seen this. And now a 12-year-old boy was trying to save a life. The nurse hesitated, but she noticed the fear in Marcus's eyes. There was something different about him. An urgency, a clarity, a confidence that only comes when someone truly understands something others do not. She nodded, quickly following his instructions, hands shaking slightly as she adjusted the IV according to Marcus's careful observations. Back in the room, the doctors continued their chaos, unaware of what was happening. Leonard's body continued to weaken, his breath shallow and irregular. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. He whispered to himself, "Come on. Please let it work, please. He didn't have authority." He didn't have a degree, he didn't have money, but he had something that mattered more right now. Vision, understanding, and courage. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, the monitors began to change. The lines on the screen steadied, the beeps became regular, and Leonard's chest rose more evenly. Marcus stepped back, eyes wide, heart racing. The impossible was happening. 15 doctors with all their knowledge and experience had been blind to the solution. And now, standing quietly at the edge of the room, Marcus, the janitor's son, had found it. And in that moment, hope returned. Marcus's heart raced as he watched the monitors. The tiny pause in Leonard Carter's heart rhythm, the one nobody else had noticed, was there, clear as day to his eyes. His mind worked faster than ever, connecting details he had learned from books, observation, and careful study. He knew the problem wasn't in the heart itself. It was in the IV, the way the fluids were flowing. A rare reaction, subtle but deadly if left unchecked. Inside the hospital room, chaos continued. Nurses ran back and forth, doctors barked instructions at one another, and Leonard's breathing grew weaker with each second. 15 brilliant minds, armed with decades of experience in cutting-edge technology, could not see what Marcus could. It was a tiny detail, almost invisible, but to him it was the key to saving a life. Marcus whispered to himself, "It's here. I know it. Just a small adjustment and he can survive. He has to survive." His small hands shook, but his eyes were steady, focused on the lines of numbers and rhythms on the screen. He had never felt so certain about anything in his life. He stepped closer to the door, hesitating for just a moment. Fear clawed at his chest. What if no one listened? What if he failed? But the thought of Leonard Carter dying, a man whose life was slipping away because 15 doctors had missed a detail, was unbearable. Marcus drew a deep breath and ran toward a passing nurse. "Please," he said, his voice trembling but urgent. "He needs this small change. The IV, it's wrong. It's tiny, almost nothing, but it's killing him slowly. Adjust it just a little. Please, it will save him." The nurse froze. She glanced toward the room filled with doctors, each one so confident in their training, yet none noticing the problem. Then she looked into Marcus's eyes. There was no arrogance, no showiness, just raw understanding and determination. Something about the boy made her believe him. She nodded, silently following his instructions, adjusting the IV with careful precision. Marcus stepped back, heart pounding, watching as the tiny correction began to take effect. The monitors blinked, hesitant at first, then steadied. Leonard's chest rose a little more easily with each breath. The beeping of the machine slowed, grew regular. His skin, once pale and gray, began to take on a faint warmth. It was subtle, but it was life returning. Inside the room, the doctors were still arguing, unaware that the crisis was being averted by the quiet child at the doorway. The chaos continued, but slowly, imperceptibly, the storm inside the room began to calm. Leonard's eyes fluttered, and for a moment he seemed to sense something. A spark of awareness, of life, returned to him. He looked around weakly, as if he could feel the hands that were saving him, even if he did not know whose. Marcus swallowed hard. He had never felt such a mix of fear and hope before. He had watched life teeter on the edge so many times, but this was different. This was a man who had seemed untouchable in the world of wealth and power, now fragile and human. And it was a boy unnoticed who had found the solution. A nurse whispered softly, glancing at Marcus. You were right. He's stabilizing." Marcus nodded quietly, eyes still on the monitors. Relief washed over him, but he did not smile. He knew the work was not completely done. Leonard's body was fragile and every second mattered. But for the first time, hope felt real. Outside the hospital room, the corridor was still quiet. Marcus felt the weight of the moment settle in his chest. He was small, ordinary in the eyes of the world, yet today he had seen what nobody else could. Today he had become more than a janitor's son. He had become someone capable of changing the course of life itself. And for the first time, he realized that sometimes the smallest eyes, the quietest minds, could see the truth that the world's smartest people overlooked. Leonard Carter's life, hanging by a thread for so long, had finally begun to return. And Marcus, the boy who had noticed what nobody else could, knew that this was only the beginning. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Leonard Carter's chest rose steadily now, a little stronger with each beat. The chaotic noise of alarms and beeping machines began to quiet, replaced by a soft, steady rhythm. 15 of the nation's top doctors standing over him just moments ago with furrowed brows and tense jaws froze. Something impossible was happening. The man they had all believed would slip away was stabilizing. Marcus watched from the doorway, heart pounding in his chest, barely daring to breathe. He had seen what the others hadn't, a tiny, almost invisible flaw in the IV, a subtle error that had caused Leonard's body to reject every treatment, every effort, every chance they had given him. Marcus had acted on instinct, knowledge, and observation, and now, slowly but surely, the miracle was unfolding before his eyes. Inside the room, Dr. Simmons frowned at the monitors. "Wait, what's happening?" he whispered. The line on the screen, once jagged and erratic, was now smooth. Leonard's pulse, once barely detectable, was now firm. Oxygen levels stabilized. The machines, which had been warning of imminent failure, now showed signs of life returning. The doctors exchanged confused glances. They had tried everything, the most advanced technology, the most brilliant treatments, the most exhaustive plans, and yet none of it had worked. And now, without warning, without a single directive from them, the man was recovering. It defied logic, reason, and experience. Marcus felt a mix of relief, pride, and disbelief. The boy who swept floors, cleaned rooms, and quietly studied in corners no one noticed had done what 15 highly trained doctors could not. A small smile tugged at his lips, though he kept his head low, quiet as ever. He didn't care for applause or recognition. He cared for life, and right now Leonard Carter was alive because he had dared to see what nobody else did. A nurse, her hand still trembling, looked at Marcus. I think you just saved him," she said softly. Marcus nodded quietly, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. It wasn't just pride. It was the realization that sometimes the world's rules and titles didn't matter. Intelligence, observation, and courage could come from anyone, anywhere. Even a boy with no degree, no authority, no money, just a heart willing to act. Inside the room, Leonard's eyes fluttered open. For a moment he looked confused, as if waking from a deep dream. Then his gaze settled on the doorway almost instinctively. He could sense something, a presence, a life force that had helped him when all else had failed. A small figure, quiet, determined, eyes filled with clarity. Leonard's lips curved weakly into a smile. It was the faintest acknowledgement, but it carried weight heavier than gold. The doctors were still processing what had happened. Dr. Simmons rubbed his eyes, muttering, How did this happen?" One by one, the others realized that no one in that room had made the critical change. The answer, impossible as it seemed, was a child. Marcus, the janitor's son, had noticed what they couldn't. The miracle was his doing. Marcus felt a wave of emotions crash over him. Relief, yes, but also awe. He had been invisible to the world, overlooked, underestimated. And yet, here he was, standing at the edge of life itself, a boy who had saved a man who seemed untouchable. For the first time, he understood that true genius was not measured by money, power, or degrees. It was measured by insight, courage, and the willingness to act. when others stood frozen by fear. Leonard's chest rose more evenly now. Color returned to his skin, and the life that had seemed so fragile began to shine again. Marcus took a deep breath, letting the weight of the moment sink in. He had changed the course of history, even if no one else knew it yet. Outside the hospital room, the corridor remained quiet. Inside, a miracle had happened. Not from machines, not from wealth, not from experience, but from a boy who had dared to see what nobody else could. And for Marcus, the world had just begun to notice. The room was quiet now, but the air was thick with amazement. Leonard Carter, the billionaire who had once commanded empires with a single word, lay in his hospital bed, breathing steadily, color returning to his cheeks. 15 doctors, still stunned, looked around at each other in disbelief. Every expert, every protocol, every advanced treatment had failed, and yet the impossible had happened. Life had returned, not through experience or wealth, but through the sharp eyes of a child. Marcus stood quietly by the doorway, his mop cart forgotten. He had done what he had always loved to do: observe, notice the unseen, and act with care. He did not seek recognition, but the room's atmosphere made it clear that recognition was coming. Slowly, a nurse approached him, a warm smile on her face. "Marcus," she said softly, "you saved him. You actually saved him." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He had known he could help, had believed he could make a difference, but hearing it aloud made the reality almost too heavy to carry. The nurse's words warmed him like sunlight, a validation he had never needed but now cherished. He nodded quietly, looking at Leonard, who was watching him with weak but aware eyes. Leonard's gaze was sharp despite his frailty. He had been unconscious, close to death. Yet somehow he sensed the presence of the boy who had restored his life. He called softly, "Boy, come here." Marcus froze. His legs felt like lead, but he stepped forward, slowly crossing the room toward the bed. Leonard reached out a trembling hand, pointing toward him. You saw what nobody else could," Leonard said, his voice hoarse but filled with awe. 15 doctors couldn't save me. Machines, medicine, every bit of science failed, but you noticed the detail, the small thing that mattered most. You saved my life." Marcus felt tears sting his eyes. He had never been praised like this before. No one had ever told him he was special, or that his quiet intelligence mattered. He had grown up invisible, a child watching the world go by while cleaning floors and corridors. And yet here, in the presence of a man who had everything, he realized his worth. It wasn't money, it wasn't degrees, it wasn't recognition. It was his mind, his heart, and his courage. The doctors, finally looking at Marcus, were speechless. One senior physician whispered, We missed it. A child noticed something none of us could see." Nods of agreement followed, shame mixed with amazement. The boy, small and unnoticed, had done what all their experience and training could not. Leonard's weak hand rested on Marcus's shoulder. "You have a mind that sees beyond what others can. You are extraordinary. I want to help you, guide you, teach you things no one else can. You could change the world, Marcus." Marcus blinked, overwhelmed by the words. He had never dreamed of such an opportunity. He had only wanted to help, to save a life. Yet here was a man offering mentorship, trust, and belief. He realized that this was the start of something bigger than him, bigger than any hospital, any floor he had cleaned, any book he had read. Outside the room, the hospital staff had gathered, murmuring in astonishment. Word of the miracle spread quickly, and though Marcus remained humble, the whispers carried a new respect. People saw the boy not as a janitor's son, but as someone extraordinary. A mind that could notice what others missed, a heart willing to act when others hesitated. Marcus glanced back at Leonard, whose eyes now sparkled with life again. He felt a quiet pride, a warmth that ran deep in his chest. Saving the billionaire had changed more than one life. It had changed his own. He realized for the first time that being small, unnoticed, or underestimated did not define a person. What mattered was courage, clarity, and the willingness to act when it mattered most. And in that moment, Marcus understood that he had not just saved a life. He had begun a journey. A journey where he would be seen, heard, and valued for who he truly was. For Marcus, the janitor's son, the world had finally opened its eyes. Months passed and the hospital halls looked the same on the surface. But for Marcus, everything had changed. He still pushed the mop cart, still cleaned rooms, still walked quietly through corridors, yet the eyes that once ignored him now watched with respect. Whispers followed him, small nods of recognition from nurses, technicians, and even doctors. They knew something extraordinary had happened, and that the boy who had saved Leonard Carter was no ordinary child. Marcus himself had changed the most. He had always been curious, always observant, always quiet, but now he understood the weight of what he could do. He had saved a life that seemed untouchable, a life that 15 of the world's best doctors had been unable to save. And more than that, he had discovered something profound about himself. Courage, intelligence, and heart mattered more than any title or recognition. Leonard Carter, fully recovered, and once again commanding the empire he had built, had taken Marcus under his wing. The billionaire funded his studies, gave him access to books, laboratories, and mentors, and most importantly, treated him as an equal in intellect, not as a child or a janitor's son. Marcus spent hours with Leonard, learning about science, business, strategy, and life itself. But Leonard also listened. He listened to Marcus's insights, respected his observations, and marveled at the clarity with which the boy saw the world. One afternoon, as Marcus adjusted equipment in a small research lab funded by Leonard, the billionaire approached him. "You know," Leonard said softly, "you've taught me something. I thought I knew everything, money, influence, power. But you've shown me the power of observation, humility, and heart. Never stop seeing the world the way you do, Marcus. That vision saved my life. It can save many more." Marcus smiled quietly. "I only saw what was right in front of me," he said. "I never expected this." Leonard placed a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't just save a life, Marcus. You changed it. You changed mine. And one day, you'll change the world." The words settled in Marcus's heart like sunlight breaking through clouds. He understood now that greatness did not come from wealth, authority, or recognition. It came from noticing what others missed, having courage when it mattered most, and acting with intelligence and compassion. Back in the hospital, the halls buzzed with life as patients, nurses, and doctors went about their work. Marcus still cleaned the floors, still observed, still moved quietly, but he was no longer invisible. People looked at him differently now, not with pity or indifference, but with respect and curiosity. The janitor's son who had saved a billionaire was now a symbol of hope, intelligence, and courage. And Marcus knew that this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges, more moments when life teetered on the edge, more times when someone else might fail. But now he had seen that even a small, unnoticed mind could make the impossible happen. Even a quiet boy could save the untouchable. As he walked down the corridor one evening, Marcus paused by the glass door of the hospital room where it had all begun. He could see Leonard sitting in a chair, reading quietly. The machines were silent, the danger long gone, but the memory remained vivid. Marcus felt a quiet sense of pride and purpose. He had done something remarkable, something that could never be erased. And in that moment, he knew his life's path had changed forever. No longer just a janitor's son, Marcus had become a beacon of possibility. The world had underestimated him once, but it would never do so again. He would continue to learn, observe, and act. And one day, the boy who once cleaned floors and pushed a mop would stand among the greatest minds, changing the world not because of wealth or titles, but because of insight, courage, and heart. And sometimes, Marcus realized, the smallest light shines brightest, the quietest voice speaks loudest, and the unnoticed child can make the impossible happen. Because greatness is not in what you have. It is in what you see, what you do, and the courage to act when the world believes it is too late. Marcus smiled, turned, and walked forward. His journey was only beginning.